Welcome to this new webinar of the Solarplaza cycle, and specifically regarding Solarplaza Nordics. Today we are joined by Rachel Locquet from Clean Horizon. Hello, Rachel. And we'll be talking about revenues. Are still revenue forecast still exciting investors for BESS in the Nordics? That's probably the golden question everyone wants to know the answer to today. So I'll just guide you through the intro of the webinar, just my usual 2 minutes of intro, and then I'll leave the control to Rachel. We have a lot of slides today, more than 30 slides, so take a coffee, be prepared, because there's a lot of very useful material. And then make sure to send in your questions in the Q&A, because we'll be addressing them at the end of the webinar. So stay focused and send in your questions. Just a bit of a few words about Solarplaza. We're already more than 20 years on the market, focusing not just on our flagship conferences like Solarplaza Nordics, but also delivering network and knowledge and content like today's webinar. And of course, we have also launched recently our platform. Check it out. I highly encourage you to check it out at solarplaza.com, where there are a lot of also announcements, news, postings related to the renewable energy world, not just in Europe, but across the whole globe. So I highly encourage you to sign up and have a look at it. Just the technicalities. Once again, I encourage you to send in your questions. We'll be addressing them to Rachel at the end of the webinar. For any technical issues, if you can't hear, can't see, please use the chat box. My colleague is in the background. She can help you solve this. And yes, we will be sharing slides, usually 1 or 2 days after the webinar. You will have them in your email inbox, so you'll have the material. Small announcement: we're running this webinar in preparation for Solarplaza Summit Nordics in Copenhagen. Quite a lot of additions behind us, so you can't miss also this one. We have also reserved a discount for you, which you can see for our webinar attendees here, and also our flagship Solarplaza Summit Asset Management Europe, which is hosted in Prague in October. So for those of you who want to join, here are the codes. That said, I'll introduce Rachel. Rachel is a lead consultant at Clean Horizon. I personally am a fan of Clean Horizon and their forecast for BESS, so very glad Rachel is hosting the webinar today. And I think, Rachel, you cover quite a lot of markets, but focusing specifically on Nordics and Baltics regions. So it's great to have you today with us. That said, I will shush myself enough with the intro and the propaganda, as they say, and I will leave the stage to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Nicola. So good morning, everyone. Very happy to be speaking during this webinar. So as Nicola said, the title of today's session is actually answering a question: are the revenue forecasts in the Nordics still exciting the investors? Because indeed, the Nordics storage market used to be very well known for its very high ancillary services prices, which did attract a lot of investors. But now the ancillary services prices have started to decline, namely in Sweden and Finland. And so today I want to explain first what happened to the revenues in the Nordics, what were the causes behind the drop in ancillary services prices, but also where the value is now, where do storage generate most of their revenues today in the Nordics, and also what it now takes for a project to be profitable and bankable in the Nordics, focusing on Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. So just a bit of delay to change the slide. I don't know if someone else can switch the slides because it's not changing on my side. Oh, thank you. So I'll have 4 parts to this webinar. The first one is a quick introduction of Clean Horizon, and then we'll dive into the market dynamics and the evolution of the market over the past year. And I'll then explain what we do on the forecast and how we can now forecast the revenues in those different geographies. And finally, showing what it takes now to build a robust business case in the Nordic countries with a focus on Denmark and Finland. So Clean Horizon, we are an energy storage, intelligence, and consultancy company that was founded in 2009. And we have two main types of services. The first one is market advisory. We provide expertise on the different markets, and we also provide price forecasts in 15 geographies. We also act as technical advisors, owners, engineers, and also lenders, technical advisors for different transactions. And we also support our clients through the different stages of development of energy storage projects. And on the right, you can see logos from developers, utilities, lenders, funds that have trusted our work, namely through bankability of projects. We cover 15 geographies on the forecast, as you can see on this map, mostly European countries, and we are expanding into the UK and Bulgaria by the end of this year. And the slides I will show you today, most of the data is actually extracted from the work that we do on the forecast at Clean Horizon. In terms of market dynamics, so that's the second part of this webinar. I'll explain what changes have happened in the revenues for storage in the Nordics from ancillary services to trading. So the first fact is that the Nordic storage market is clearly booming. We've seen a sharp increase in the storage operational capacity in the Nordics from September 2025 to today, namely in Finland. You can see the red boxes here. In Finland, we went from 300 megawatt operational in September 2025 to 1.6 gigawatts of storage operational in September 2026. So the growth is very, very high, and it has been driven, as I said earlier, by very high ancillary services prices and high returns expected for those projects. So the market is clearly growing very fast in the Nordics for storage, both in Finland but also in Sweden. So in Sweden here, the 800 is only the publicly disclosed project, but based on the pre-qualified power on ancillary services, the estimated operational capacity is rather 1.5 gigawatt. So the storage market is pretty much similar to the Finnish one. And then we have Denmark, which is growing at a slower pace, but still attracting interest from developers and investors. So overall, the market in terms of operational capacity is growing very fast, but also in terms of construction and also announced capacity. In Finland, in total, we are at 6 gigawatts. So if every project publicly announced were to be operational, then we will have 6 gigawatts of project in Finland, which is quite large compared to what we saw last year. But then, of course, not every announced project will be necessarily operational in the coming years. But this number is interesting to get a sense of the interest that people have in those markets. And also, the Finnish TSO mentioned that they received in 1 year 32 gigawatts of grid connection requests, which also goes to show the interest that we see for projects, for storage projects in Finland. But at the same time, we see the evolution of the revenues in the Nordics. So this graph shows the battery index for our project in the Nordics. So it's an index that's computed based on historical prices and using our in-house simulation tool, Cosmos. This index is publicly available and free on our website, so you can check it out for the different geographies that we cover. But in the Nordics, what we can observe is that, namely in Sweden and Finland, the index in May 2025 used to be at around 400 to 500 euro per kilowatt per year. So it's annualized values. And now we are closer to 100, 150, 200 euro per kilowatt per year. So there's definitely been a decrease in the revenues that can be captured by energy storage in the Nordics. And in Denmark, that's not as, we don't see that decrease. The revenues are more stable and they remain at levels that were pretty much the same as last year, a little bit lower. So that decrease in revenues that I'm talking about is mostly applicable to Finland and Sweden, when Denmark remains at quite high level of revenues for now in the Nordics. So the reason behind this decrease in revenue is mainly the decrease in ancillary services prices, which I will show you just after. And so we can see that here, if we do a focus on the 2-hour index in Finland from September to March 2026, in September, the revenues used to be mainly made of ancillary services, so FCRN, FCRD, FFR, also MFR and AFR, so really a range of different ancillary services that were making projects on very high revenues. And since then, we've seen a progressive decrease of the revenues, as I showed earlier. And also, the split of revenues has changed a lot. We went from a stack that was mostly ancillary services, and now we are with a stack that's mostly dependent on trading opportunities. So a mix of day-ahead and intraday trading. So both the revenues have decreased, but they have also changed shape, and they are now mostly dependent on trading and not so much on ancillary services as they used to be. So the first step into this decrease in revenue is understanding that the ancillary services prices have decreased in Finland. So we can see the FCR prices went from about 18 to now 5. And on AFR and MFR, we've also seen a decrease both in the up and down direction. The down has decreased at a faster pace on AFR than the up, but still we see that trend on both sides. And this decrease is mostly can mostly be attributed to the growth in energy storage and wind certified capacity on the ancillary services, which those two assets tend to bid on the auctions at a lower price than the conventional assets providing ancillary services. They have lower marginal cost of provision of the ancillary services, and so they tend to push out of the merit order the expensive assets and decrease the prices on the auctions. And that's can be very well observed if you take a look at the increase in certified capacity on the different ancillary services in Finland. So here we've shown the increase in certified capacity of storage in Finland from 2024 to February 2026. And the storage capacity certified now exceeds all of the market volumes for every ancillary service. So there's clearly now a big portion of the ancillary services volume that can be met by batteries. And so the price has decreased because batteries bidding into those markets have progressively pushed out the expensive assets and led to a decrease in the ancillary services prices. And that is combined with also wind that pre-qualifies on ancillary services and bids at lower prices than conventional power plants. And so wind also contributes to decreasing the ancillary services prices in Finland. And that is also something that we have seen in Sweden. In Sweden, there's been a large pre-qualification of wind and storage happening over the past year, namely on MFR, which used to be a very profitable market in Sweden. And here you can see that in less than a year, the prices went from almost 50 to about 5 euro per megawatt per hour. So the decrease is super fast, and it has been driven by that additional pre-qualified capacity of storage and wind on the market, pushing out, as I said, the expensive assets out of the merit order. So overall, the decrease in ancillary services is definitely linked to the growth of the storage market that have shown before, and is a result of the growing competition on the ancillary services markets in the Nordics. So on one side, we have the ancillary services prices, which decline. That's a clear trend that we see due to that increase in competition. But on the other hand, we also see a rise in the volatility of the wholesale electricity markets in the Nordics. The one thing that we can look at to understand this is the evolution of the negative prices events. So this is the number of hours where the prices were below or equal to 0 in the Nordics in 2025. So actually, the Nordics were very exposed to the negative price events, namely Sweden and Finland, but also Denmark, DK1, for example. So the events of very low prices have grown in the Nordics over the past year, and this is creating new needs for flexibility in the region. And I think it's interesting to understand where those negative prices come from, because they don't come from the same from the same reasons in each zone in the Nordics. So, for example, if we look at the blue curve, it's Denmark. Denmark is very well interconnected with Germany, especially DK1. So this is the zone that's in the west, and they are very well interconnected with Germany. The prices are the day-ahead prices are very, very correlated with Germany. And we can see that in Denmark, the negative price hours are mostly located during the midday. So during the hours where you have a lot of sun, because Denmark has a lot of solar capacity, Germany as well. And we know that Germany is exposed to a lot of negative prices, especially during the solar hours. And this is the same trend that we observe in Denmark, so DK1 and also DK2. But if you look at SC2, which was the first, the zone with the highest number of negative hours in 2025, or SC2 actually has higher numbers of negative hours during the evening. And so in SC2, SC1, and Finland, actually the negative price event happened mostly at night due to high wind production and low demand, which then create tension and can result in negative prices. So the reason behind those negative price events is different depending on where, which country you're looking at, and it's completely dependent on the electricity mix of each country. And if we do a focus on two country electricity mixes, but one day, and very different day-ahead prices. This is on June 30th, 2025. So in Denmark, the mix is mostly wind, solar, and then thermal, and also a lot of import-exports with neighboring countries. In Finland, the mix is mostly nuclear, hydro, wind, and a bit of other generation, but a lot of wind. And during that day, the day-ahead volatility in Denmark, so the volatility here, I call the spread, so it's the difference between the highest price of the day and the lowest price of the day. And that gives you a good estimation of the revenue a 1 hour storage system could have captured in the area on the day-ahead market. And so in DK1, on the 30th of June, the day-ahead volatility was 279 euro per megawatt hour. So that's a very good spread. For reference, the average spread in Germany in 2025 was 125. So 279 is a very good day-ahead spread. And that was driven by low prices during the day because we had a lot of solar, and high prices in the evening because low local generation from renewables. So this was a very good mix for high day-ahead volatility. If you look at the Finnish electricity mix on the same day, you can see that most of the electricity demand was covered by low-cost electricity generation like nuclear, hydro, wind. And so actually the day-ahead volatility was only 9 euro per megawatt hour on that day. So depending on the electricity mix, you can see very different volatility on the day-ahead markets. And so the day-ahead opportunities for batteries really do depend on the electricity mix of the country and also of its neighbors. And it can lead to completely different numbers on one day in the geography. And what's a good sign, for example, in Finland, is that the TSO and other sources expect a growth in the electricity demand, and electricity demand tends to create those gaps that we see here, where you need to use more conventional generation that tends to have higher prices, and that creates volatility on the market. And if we look even at one country, this is the day-ahead price in Finland in August on 2 different days. So it was on 2 different days, one day with high wind and one day with a low wind output. And we can see that on the day with low wind output, the average price was higher, which makes sense because there was less low-cost electricity generation. And the volatility was a lot higher as well, because we have peaks of prices in the evening and lower pricings during the day, which can be due to solar output, either local or from imports. And so on that day, the day-ahead volatility was pretty high. But if you look at the day-ahead volatility on a high wind day, it was much lower because the price is pretty low all day long. So the wind output on a given day can impact strongly the day-ahead volatility on that day. And in general, the more wind, depending on its profile, the more wind can reduce the day-ahead volatility, whereas solar, since it produces all during the day, it creates lower prices during the day and increases the day-ahead volatility. So it's both the total installed capacity in a country and the general electricity mix, but it's also at the daily granularity what is happening in terms of the production profile of each of those generating assets. And so a useful indicator, as I said, is the day-ahead spread. And these are the values for 2025 for the different Nordic countries that I'm covering here. We can see that Denmark is first in the ranking, so DK2, then we have DK1, Sweden, Finland, and SC3. So the ranking clearly shows that the countries which are the most interconnected with Germany, which is a country with high flexibility needs, and the countries that are very well connected to Germany have the highest volatility. So that's the DK2, DK1, and SC4, which is at the south of Sweden. The countries which are a bit further and have a mix which is less favorable to volatility have lower volatilities. So that's a trend that we observe now. Now it can change in the future based on the evolution of the electricity demand, based on the evolution of the electricity mix as well. But it's interesting to see what it looks like now, and also the big impact of interconnection, not just with the Nordic countries, but also with Germany, Poland, etc., which also have an impact on the trading opportunities in the Nordic countries. So overall, we have two trends in the Nordics. First, the ancillary services revenues are decreasing. They are decreasing because there's a rise in electricity energy storage certification on ancillary services. There's also a rise in wind capacity providing ancillary services. So the opportunities on ancillary services are not as good as they used to be in the Nordics. And yes, the ancillary services needs are growing in the Nordics, but based on the amount of storage projects that are going to be built over the next few years, we don't expect ancillary services revenues to increase back up again in a very large magnitude. So yeah, ancillary services revenues will remain opportunistic, and some days we'll have higher prices, but overall it won't be the main source of revenue in the future based on what we see. But on the other hand, the wholesale electricity market volatility is clearly rising, and we see a growth in the flexibility needs for in the different Nordic countries that's driven by the increasing renewable penetration, but also in the future, the electricity demand growth. We have seen in 2025 a spike in the day-ahead volatility, and also we have a growth in the intraday liquidity, which I will get back to just after, which is growing also the opportunities for trading in the Nordic countries. So overall, the opportunities still remain good in the Nordics. They have just shifted from ancillary services to trading. So for this next section, we will take a look at forecasting revenues for energy storage in the different Nordic countries. So first, looking at the split of revenues in Denmark and Finland from July to 2025 to July 2026. So as I said, Denmark has kept pretty high revenues compared to Finland, for example. But in both cases, the revenues are actually splitted between ancillary services day-ahead and intraday, with day-ahead and intraday taking a bigger share of the revenues than it used to be. So Denmark has a split, which is also made of intraday, day-ahead. It still has some higher ancillary services revenues, but the intraday opportunities are much higher than in Finland. And that keeps also the revenues at a higher level than they do in Finland. Because indeed, so yeah, as the Nordic battery market used to be very attracted by ancillary services, and that was right because the prices were very high. But storage is very good at capturing electricity markets volatility, and not just one market, but multiple markets for which the prices fluctuate, and storage can capture that fluctuation of price. And that is what it can do, for example, on the day-ahead and intraday markets. So this is quite a complex slide, but basically what it means is that for one given time slot during a day, there will be multiple electricity prices. There will be the day-ahead price, the intraday auction price 1, intraday auction price 2, intraday auction price 3, and then multiple prices on the intraday auction. And what storage can do is use its capacity to trade multiple times for one time slot, capturing the volatility for the electricity price of one given time slot, plus the volatility over various time slots. And so a good trader will be able to take advantage of those fluctuating prices and increase the revenue from just capturing the day-ahead volatility to capturing the day-ahead volatility plus additional revenues from the intraday auctions, and the book of order of the intraday continues. So it's very important to not only look at the day-ahead volatility, but also figure out if there's anything that you can capture also on the intraday market, which is, by the way, one of the main revenue stream right now in Germany, for energy storage assets. So it's definitely an important revenue stream for energy storage. And indeed, the intraday liquidity has been growing substantially in the Nordic countries. So here's only the Nord Pool data. Intraday can also be, well, assets can also trade on intraday on Apex, for example. So this is only Nord Pool. And you can see, especially in Denmark, that there's been a fast growth of the intraday volume in Denmark. Intraday is also a European market. So, for example, an asset in Denmark can trade with Germany and an asset in Finland with Sweden if the interconnection allow. So it's just like the head, it's also linked to what's happening in the neighboring countries. And so in Denmark, the intraday liquidity is growing. Finland as well. The intraday liquidity is growing, and also the prices are very volatile there on the intraday. So this creates a lot of opportunities for traders to capture more revenues on intraday in Finland. And in Sweden, it's growing at a slower pace, especially in the north, but in the south, it's growing, but at currently a slower pace than in other Nordic countries. But so overall, this intraday must be studied whenever we do a business model, because that's this extra revenue that can make a project from not profitable to profitable. And that's definitely an opportunity that must be captured whenever we trade business battery storage assets. So storage assets in the Nordics have access to multiple revenue streams. I said that ancillary services prices have decreased, yes, but sometimes they are still attractive. And so storage must always choose every day when they enter the market what they are going to do with the capacity. Is it going to be ancillary services, intraday, day ahead? So just like a trader would, we have designed a tool that's called Cosmos. That's a simulation tool that's meant to estimate the revenues that energy storage can generate on the different markets. And the tool is meant to be realistic in the sense that it doesn't assume that the trader or the tool has access to the perfect foresight of the different markets to which it's going to participate. Because, for example, intraday, you can't know precisely in advance what will be the revenues that you can generate on intraday. And the same goes for different ancillary services. So that's the purpose of this tool, is to estimate realistically revenues that energy storage can generate in the different markets. And that's the tool that we use for the index computation. So those are the numbers I showed before. And this is also the tool that we use to produce the revenue stacks in the future for energy storage. So there are two steps, just like a trader has to trade in two main steps. You have first the optimization in the day before the delivery day. That's where you have to take positions on the ancillary services capacity auction and also the day ahead, because the auctions happen the day before the delivery day. And once you've taken your positions on ancillary services and day ahead, during the day, you have to take positions on you can take position on the intraday and also place bids on the FR energy and MFR energy activation markets. So this is exactly how it works on the tool, and this enables to estimate realistically revenues that can be generated by energy storage on every market possible. And a very important thing that Cosmos takes into account, and I believe it's crucial when we build a business model in the Nordics, is that it takes into account the market share. Because currently in Finland, in a lot of ancillary services markets, you have more certified capacity than the size of the market. Meaning, if you want to compute the revenue of an energy storage asset in Finland, you can't assume that that storage asset is going to get all the capacity of one ancillary services, because it's being in competition with many other assets. And so we take that competition into account. So we do not assume that one asset can earn, for example, a very high price on ancillary services if it's in competition with other assets, but only a part of the asset will be selected in the auction. And that provides more realistic estimation of the revenues that takes into account the fact that the storage asset is not alone on the market, but has to compete with other assets on the market. So this is an example. If let's take AFR. If AFR is a market of 400 megawatts and there are 200 megawatts of assets pre-qualified on AFR, that means that our tool will assume that if you simulate a storage asset, it can only bid half of its capacity on the AFR because there's double the amount of storage certified to provide that service. And that consideration makes the business model realistic in terms of estimation of the revenues. So this is on the revenue stack part. And now, whenever we want to build a forecast, we have to set key assumptions that will then drive the prices that we forecast. As I showed earlier in the presentation, for example, the day-ahead price, it depends on the electricity mix, it depends on the gas prices, and those are all assumptions that you need to set for the future before you produce a price forecast. So the key ones that we use are first the electricity mix, second the commodity prices, third the neighboring countries, and fourth the energy storage and flexibility development that impacts both the ancillary services prices, as we've seen in the past, but also, and that's very important, it will impact the electricity market's volatility, because if the storage charges when the electricity price is very low, it might bring the price back up. And on the contrary, when electricity storage charges, it might reduce the price in the evening because you don't need to call as expensive power plants as you do if you don't have storage. So you need to model also the impact of storage on the day-ahead market and intraday revenues. And this is an example of a revenue stack that we have for Denmark, so DK1, and it's starting in 2028. So what you can see is that in the first few years, the revenues decrease because you have lower opportunities on, for example, the intraday, because it does get saturated as well, the intraday market. That's important to model it. And you also have the degradation that's included in this revenue stack that decreases the revenues. And also another thing to notice is that 80% approximately of the revenue stack is coming from wholesale trading. So the revenue opportunities from trading must be precisely modeled because they are a big part of the revenue stack now, and not as we saw in the early years. It was mostly ancillary services, but now it's really trading that's making a big portion of the revenue stack for projects. Here I'm showing Denmark, but the same can be observed in Sweden and Finland. So finally, about the business case. So I first showed the revenue stack, but whenever you're building a business case, it's not just about the revenues, it's of course about the cost. And for example, in Denmark, the grid fees and electricity taxes make up 34% of the OPEX for a project in Denmark. So that's quite high. And this is definitely a cost that depends on the exact location of the project. It depends on the country. And so it's a cost that you must look at whenever you're building a storage business case. And this is just showing an example of two different tariffs in Denmark with or without limited grid access agreements. And this shows that if you have that limited grid access agreement, you can increase the IRR by 9%. So that's definitely a good increase. And that's the type of thing that you want to check whenever you're building a project, choosing a project. It's what are the conditions for grid access, what are the grid fees, because it can clearly make a project profitable or unprofitable, especially in areas in Sweden, where depending on the DSO that you connect to, the grid fees can be completely different from one to the other, and can make a project profitable or unprofitable. So that's definitely something that that must be studied when you're building a business case. And so you have the grid fees, but as you may know, most TSOs are now implementing grid limitations for the projects that are connecting to the grid, either injection or withdrawal. And those limitations have an impact on the revenues, but the impact on the revenues depends strongly on the type of limitations that you have. If you have limitations that are pretty well in line with the market, then the impact can actually be pretty small. That's what I show here, where you have the limitations during the solar hours. Actually, the impact is pretty small. But if, for example, you can't inject when the wind produces a lot, that can have a much bigger impact on the revenues, because wind also produces when the electricity prices are high. So that's also something to check, is the type of limitations that you have, and modeling them properly to avoid over or underestimating the impact on the revenues. And the timeline is also key to reach bankability. The COD date has definitely an impact on the project profitability, because as you saw on the Denmark revenue stack that I showed, the revenues tend to decrease over time. And so the sooner the project becomes operational, the better for the profitability. And so a project can be bankable or not, depending also on its COD date. So that's a key parameter as well. So overall, there are 4 main things that must be studied to achieve bankable, profitable projects. So first, the grid cost. Check the grid fees. These depend strongly on the location and on the zone also that you connect to, and they can make a project from profitable to unprofitable, and they will depend a lot on the DSO. Hybridization is also a way to reduce the exposure to grid fees. Second, the connection conditions. The agreement that you have with the TSO, is it firm or do you have limited access? The curtailment risk will depend also on the type of limitation that you will be imposed. Third, we didn't touch much on it because I discussed most of the market revenues, but of course, tolling and offtake agreements can improve strongly the bankability of projects. We've seen PPA tolling signed in the Nordics over the past few months, and they definitely increase the bankability of projects. And finally, local development. The development constraints are quite different between Finland, Denmark, and Sweden, and they do impact namely the timing of the project, the COD, and therefore they also impact, of course, the project profitability. So these are 4 things to look for to build bankable projects in the Nordics. And finally, last slide to summarize. So to answer the question, are revenue forecasts still exciting investors? So the area where IRRs were increased, like most very, very high in the Nordics, I think is maybe over, but we still get good profitability for projects in the Nordics if they match different criteria that I mentioned. So good grid fees, modeled limitations, also contracted revenues. And so, yes, the market has shifted. The business model is looking very different, but projects can still achieve very good profitability in the Nordics if they are studying the different elements right and managing to capture other good revenues on the day ahead and intraday. So thanks a lot for listening to the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions now.
Super. Thank you very much, Rachel. And we can go to the questions. We have some time left for it, so I also I have to send them more. Okay, let's go with the questions in order. So, Rachel, the first one relates to the emergency plan for the Danish electricity grid, and how do you view, basically in terms of BESS, the likelihood that only limited grid connection capacity will be available? How will that shape the returns for BESS?
So yes, indeed, it's under reformation, the grid access in Denmark, and it might be that in the future, most projects will have limitations for the grid connection. But this is something that we see honestly in most European countries. In Germany, it's the same. France is also becoming the same. So it's a trend that we see in most European countries, and I don't think it's preventing projects from being profitable, but it's adding another layer of complexity into being able to model those limitations, estimate them, maximize them, also to understand the risk behind those limitations. But it's not like many projects are bankable and have limitations in Europe, so it's not something that will make them unprofitable, but it's a complexity that must be properly modeled to understand the risk behind the limitations.
Okay. Indeed, very good. Let's go with the next question. Of course, this relates to one big topic which is everywhere in the news now, so data centers. The question is, do you think, Rachel, in your view, that data center will become kind of a growth area for installed storage capacity in the future? What's your view on that?
So data centers, what they do is they increase the electricity demand in the country. And as we've seen, the electricity demand growth tends to increase the day-ahead volatility. And so, yes, the data centers increase the opportunity for storage, but it's not a direct link. It's more that it has an impact on the market volatility, and therefore it creates opportunities for flexibility assets to capture that volatility.
Sure. Okay, let's go more into the topic of trading now. One of the questions we have relates to the evolution of day ahead and intraday trading, and basically how does the rise and the evolution of this trading impacts medium long duration storage. What trends are we seeing? Is it more like a 2-hour, 4-hour developments more now? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
So the fact that the revenues are shifting more towards trading means that the revenues are becoming a little bit more proportional to the duration of the assets, which was not really the case for ancillary services. Like if you have a 1-hour or 4-hour asset on FCR, you earn pretty much the same revenues, whereas now on day ahead and intraday, if you have a 2-hour versus a 4-hour, you will earn more with the 4-hour system. So the revenues are definitely higher with longer duration system now than they used to be, but I think it depends also a lot on the cost. It depends on the trends, on the additional cost of those megawatt hours that you're going to install. So I would say that if you have a solution where the extra cost for that additional megawatt hour is low compared to the additional revenue that you can get from trading, then yes, longer duration is going to make more sense. And for us, with our assumption, it's yes, it is starting to make more sense to go into 4-hour storage systems rather than shorter durations to capture the volatility on the day ahead and intraday markets.
Okay, clear. So indeed, there's that relation. I'm looking also at more questions. Feel free to send them in. One actually relates to the. One second. I'm trying to shorten a bit for you, Rachel, because they're quite they're quite long. But let's go probably deep dive a bit into the Finnish market. So, do you see basically a link between the saturation of the Finnish flexibility markets and solar capture rates? What's your take on that? And basically, are you also observing a shift from ancillary services more towards energy arbitrage in that market, which supports solar capture rates and improves investment returns and so on? If you could expand a little bit on that.
So yeah, definitely storage assets in Finland have already started to shift to day-ahead trading. You can see it on the data from Ancillary. There's already storage charging during high production hours like solar or wind, and discharging during high electricity demand and low wind, low solar hours. So storage is definitely already contributing to reducing those negative or very low price events in Finland. And it has already shifted from ancillary services to the heads. And in terms of the capture price, it depends on the magnitude of how much storage is going to be developed, because if a lot of solar is developed as well in Finland, then you might need a lot of storage to compensate for the decrease in capture price. So yeah, it might contribute, but you need a large amount of flexibility to compensate a big growth in solar, and therefore potential reduction in the capture price of solar.
Okay, very good. And then Rachel, we can take probably one more question based on the slides here. We indeed, one of the attendees is asking if this is probably a correct conclusion. Based on the slides, we see that basically this high wind penetration flattens spreads, and kind of high solar penetration during daylight hours kind of creates the spreads. Is this basically a common pattern, and is this somewhat the pattern that we'll also observe over the next period?
So that's what we've observed in the Nordics for now, but then it depends a lot on the profile of the wind output, which depends on the country, because it depends where the wind farms are located. So in general, yes, if the wind tends to produce pretty evenly over the day, it does flatten the volatility. But if it produces in spikes, then it can create volatility. So the overall trend is that it flattens, but on some days it can be the opposite. And
Okay.
solar definitely increases the volatility.
So there is basically as clear as it can be in terms of pattern. I would say. Super, Rachel. Thank you very much. I would say also, very interesting slides. By the way, we will make them available for the attendees via email. And Rachel will be also opening the Solarplaza Summit Nordics in Copenhagen. So we'll also have the chance to speak and engage with her directly there. We'll probably just round up then the webinar showing also indeed the codes at which you can register here, also making use of the discount, which is valid until September the 9th. And we hope to see you then very much in Copenhagen for Solarplaza Nordics, and in Prague for Solarplaza Summit Asset Management Europe. Rachel, thank you very much for being with us today. And as mentioned, we will see each other at the conference in Copenhagen in a few weeks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Till the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.